This morning's scripture reading is from the book of Exodus, chapter 32, 7 to 14, and the book of Numbers, chapter 14, 10b to 23. In Exodus, the Lord spoke to Moses, "Hurry up and go down. Your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, are ruining everything. They've already abandoned the path that I've commanded. They've made a metal bull calf for themselves. They've bowed down to it and offered sacrifices to it and declared, 'These are your gods, Israel, whom brought you out of the land of Egypt.' The Lord said to Moses, 'I've been watching these people. I've been seeing how stubborn they are. Now leave me alone. Let my fury burn and devour them. Then I'll make a great nation out of you.' But Moses pleaded with the Lord, his God, 'Lord, why does your fury burn against your own people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, with great power and amazing force? Why should the Egyptians say, he had an evil plan to take the people out and kill them in the mountains, and so wipe them off the earth? Calm down your fierce anger. Change your mind about doing terrible things to your own people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, whom you yourself promised. I will make your descendants as many as the stars in the sky. And I promise to give your descendants this whole land to possess for all time.' Then the Lord changed his mind about the terrible things he said he would do to his people." From the book of Numbers. Then the Lord's glory appeared in the meeting tent to all the Israelites. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people disrespect me? How long will they doubt me after all the signs I performed among them? I will strike them down with a plague and disown them. I will take you into a great nation stronger than they." Moses said to the Lord, "The Egyptians will hear, for with your power you brought these people up from among them. Then they will tell the inhabitants of this land that they heard that you, Lord, are with this people. You, Lord, appeared to them face to face. Your cloud stands over them. You go before them in a column of a cloud by day and a column of lightning by night. If you kill these people, every last one of them, the nations who heard about you will say, 'The Lord wasn't able to bring these people out of the land that he solemnly promised to give them. So he slaughtered them in the desert. Now let my master's power be as great as you declared when you said, the Lord is very patient and absolutely loyal, forgiving the wrongs and disloyalty. Yet he does not forgo all punishment, disciplining the children, the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren for their ancestors' wrongs. Please forgive the wrongs of these people because of your absolute loyalty, just as you have forgiven these people from their time in Egypt up until now.' Then the Lord said, 'I'll forgive as you requested, but as I live, and as the Lord's glory fills the entire earth, none of the men who saw my glory and the signs I did in Egypt and in the desert, but tested me these 10 times and haven't listened to my voice, will see the land I promised to their ancestors. And all who disrespected me won't see it.' May God bless the reading and hearing of his holy word."
So today, I reflect on another book that I read during my sabbatical. And I thank you again and again for this important time over the past summer to step back, take some deep breaths, and reflect. I can't tell you how many discussions I've had with people of faith about the issue of church, God, theology, as it relates to one's sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. You are aware, because many of you went with me to Carter County last year, and I've kept all the church in the loop of other speaking engagements on the issue. So you're aware and thankfully have supported that I have felt that I've been called to be a prophetic and justice-minded voice on this issue. While there are several open and affirming congregations in central Kentucky, and I give thanks for them, very few of them are pastored by an openly gay married minister. And we're probably the largest one in our area in that category. I've sat in my office with many of you, and I've heard you through tears wonder if, really if, God is okay with your choice of partner or transition in gender. I've listened to story after story of rejection by parents and family, friends, work associates. And if you haven't been outright rejected, others of you wrestle because your family loves you but doesn't agree with you. And I've heard the same questions from many of you who are heterosexual, but whose family or friends question your advocacy or your choice to attend church with those people and that pastor. And so some of you have asked me, what can I do? What should I say? I stand before you this morning having traveled a similar journey. And I've shared with you before that it was about a 20-year journey for my mom and I to come to grips with my sexuality. I've also shared a time or two that one of my nephews, who I love dearly, is currently a deacon at the very same Southern Baptist church that kicked me out for being gay. It is that same nephew who told me a few months ago that he believes my being gay will separate me from an eternal home with God. And I have other family members that are somewhere in between my mom and my nephew, at various stages of understanding, tolerance, or acceptance. I'm lucky that my parents and many others in my family actually celebrate who I am and fully embrace my and Brenda's marriage. So to those here today who identify as LGBT, I get it. I'm also aware that while this church is wildly accepting and stands as a beacon of hope and justice and inclusive love, some still are not quite sure how to align old held belief systems with a faithful response to the LGBT community. Over the years, to try to come to some reconciliation with myself and to try to understand why some struggle, I've read literally hundreds of books on the subject. You know, I had a personal stake in the issue. I had some skin in the game. And then once I entered seminary, every single major project which was assigned to us to dig really into Scripture and theology, I chose the subject of how the Bible speaks to issues of sexuality and gender. And I did that because I was and I am. It is important to me that if I stand in a pulpit proclaiming something, I should at least be able to back up my comments with some biblical and objective principles. Relative to the subject of sexuality in Scripture, of all the books I've read, Changing Our Mind by David P. Gushee is one of the best. You may not know who David Gushee is. Kenny, you might. But I can tell you that until a few years ago, I didn't have a lot of interest in his books or his theology. For decades now, David has earned the reputation as America's leading evangelical ethicist. Did y'all hear that? An evangelical ethicist. David is, or I might say was, a sought-after speaker in evangelical circles around the country. You might imagine then the response when this leading evangelical ethicist admitted that he had been dead wrong on the LGBT issue. It's not every day that a religious leader makes a confession like this. In the book Changing Our Minds, David Gushee explains why he had a change of heart, and he goes head on into the clobber scriptures that he himself had used for years. Now, in fairness, David was never known to gay bash. He attacked homophobia, and he called for Christian compassion. In other words, he was not mean-spirited like we would find at those at Liberty University, the Family Foundation, the likes of the Falwells or the Swaggarts, James Dobson or Pat Robinson. No, David was more like Joel Osteen, who preaches the whole love the sinner, hate the sin sermon, which, by the way, can be just as harmful. Admittedly, David preached an incongruence between biblical text and LGBT behavior for over 27 years of his ministry. In his book, David says, and I quote, "My mind and heart have changed as God has sent large numbers of sexual others into my life." And then he dives deeply, but with brevity, in aligning scripture interpretation with reasons why his mind has changed. So for those of you who are asked me, or those of you who are wondering, what do I say? What do I do? I would highly recommend that you get this book for yourself and perhaps share it with those close to you who are struggling to fully embrace and celebrate the LGBT community. You may wonder why I chose the scriptures Michael read to us this morning. For on the surface, they have nothing to do with the LGBT issue. But I'll tell you what they have to do with: changing our minds. And the most perfect example I can give, the most solid justification I can give for changing one's mind is found in these two stories. And there are other stories like them. But in both stories Michael read from Exodus and Numbers, we'll see if you're paying attention. In both of those stories, what was a common action by God? God changed God's mind. Now, I got to tell you, the first time I heard that in seminary, I about croaked. So, Stephanie, tell Rachel to get ready. I resisted the thinking that a human could convince God to change God's mind, for I was taught it was always the other way around. In the Exodus story, God was so upset because the people had rebelled and built idols and were acting out in a big way. God told Moses, "I'm going to destroy them." And Moses appealed to God on behalf of the people, and verse 14 says, "And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster he planned to bring on his people." The story in Numbers is similar. People act out again and rebel. Imagine that, acting out again. We humans do that, don't we? And God says, "You know what? I'm going to disinherit them." And Moses appeals to God again and says, "God, don't do that. Forgive them." And what did God do? God forgives them, and God changes God's mind again. David Gushee changed his mind about the LGBT community. God changed God's mind about destroying or disinheriting the people. So what about us? What might we change our mind about? Friends, it's hard work to change our mind about an issue, because to do it right, to do it as David Gushee did, we need to have some objective reasons and justification when we begin a 360-degree journey. So there's lots of us here who are LGBT or very supportive of that community. I would say every one of us here falls into that category. Our straight allies have walked hand in hand with us and often led the way. So I wonder, we've checked that box, huh? But what are there other issues that we struggle with? Are there other social or systemic issues that you struggle with? Is your mind capable of any change? I once knew a pastor who had someone come into his congregation. The congregation was much like ours in terms of acceptance and preaching of a more progressive theology, which is why this lesbian woman decided to visit this church. She was one of the newest visitors who had been coming to the church. She was raised in a rural area of Kentucky in a very conservative church. After several weeks, the woman asked to have lunch with the pastor and told him she'd like to join the church, which she did a few weeks later. Pretty soon, she became more involved in church, really became a leader, chairing the diaconate, serving as treasurer, singing in the choir, really settling in. Around election season, this new member boldly announced that she was going to run for political office and had her platform all figured out. Now, she had no intentions for running for office, but she had sort of a big mouth and wanted to be boisterous about her view of the prison system. So she told the pastor and several others who were standing around after a council meeting that her platform would be this: each state would have 100 prison beds for serious convicts. Using her budget skills, this member had figured out that it would be easy for states to keep their costs fairly fixed because they would never have more than 100 prisoners. When someone was convicted and sent to prison, then the longest serving prisoner would be killed that day. Sort of a first in, first out kind of system. In other words, this member was proclaiming her extreme stance on capital punishment. Now, I'm sure, because the pastor shared later with me, I'm sure he was taken aback by this member's comment. This was also, by the way, the same member that told the pastor another time that we should have taller walls at our borders and take care of our own. Golly, does that sound familiar? An early proclamation of "Let's make America great again." You might imagine how this pastor responded. "Wow, I've really got my work cut out for this little gal." And yet he didn't kick her out or remove her from council. He was just pleased she came to church. She was there every week unless she was on vacation. And over time, the pastor began to see a pretty dramatic change. It was slow and subtle, but it was a journey towards mind and heart changing. Several years into this woman's church ministry, she asked the pastor if she could accompany him on some home visit he had planned to do. He welcomed the company, and while they were driving around, the woman told the pastor she had felt called to ministry since her teenage years. She shared with him the dramatic change in her social stances and her faith beliefs. She lamented that she ever thought capital punishment was a good idea. She cried, literally, about her feelings of hierarchy and superiority because she was simply lucky enough to be born in a free country like the United States. She said to the pastor, "I don't believe in capital punishment anymore. I don't know what my platform would be if I ran for office. And I don't know the answer to crime, but I don't think capital punishment is God's way to deal with things." Then she said to the pastor, "You know that whole building the wall thing and taking care of our own? Well, I've changed my mind on that too. I think maybe we should just have lemonade stands at the border. And as long as those coming in don't have criminal records or ill intent, we ought to welcome them. After all, they welcome us by being here picking our fruit, working in the lowest level jobs, serving our food." Upon hearing this from the woman, the pastor said, "Have you ever considered seminary?" The woman replied, "No, because the church I was raised in, I couldn't because I was a woman and I was gay." The pastor replied, "Well, some seminaries, including Lexington Theological Seminary, they've changed their mind. And they'll accept openly gay students." Within weeks, I applied, and I was accepted. Oh yeah, I know the intimate details of this story. I know about the change of heart and mind on the issue of capital punishment, immigration, because this was my journey. The woman was me, and the pastor was my mentor, Reverend Bill Kincaid. I did a 360-degree turn on the issues of capital punishment, immigration, and there have been many other issues I've changed my mind about since I became willing to do the hard work of reflection. You see, it's not one and done. We need to constantly evaluate where we are in our thinking and our beliefs and how and why we got there. David Gushee laments all the years he failed to support and welcome and embrace the LGBT community. And I lament that I ever uttered my political platform on prison or immigration reform. And then I remember I'm in pretty good company. God changed God's mind more than once. So it appears to me that God modeled this for us. My brothers and sisters, I'm not asking you this morning to come to the same conclusions as I have relative to abolishing capital punishment or building lemonade stands at the borders. You may not agree with my positions on gun control or labor unions or income equality. We all have minds and hearts, and we think differently about the issues that challenge us as we try to live in a complicated global world, as we try to live as brothers and sisters together. But what I am asking you, and me, and them, what I am asking is to embark on the hard work of examining what we believe, why we believe it, if we might consider other options. We've all been hurt. We have our prejudices and people we choose to avoid, and sometimes that's valid. And yet, minds and hearts are capable of change. And sometimes change turns an evangelical ethicist to an LGBT advocate. Sometimes change turns a boisterous, opinionated, ill-informed new member to a pastor that'll travel far and wide to stand in solidarity with social justice over and over again. Sometimes God changes God's mind. Might that invite and encourage us to do the same?